and welcome to everyone who's joining me on this panel, a very special panel which is brought to you by the Quint and Accenture India. My name is Nishtha Gautam, and today I'm joined by a stellar panel of speakers to discuss a very important topic, which is inclusion in corporate India. And as we all know, that 3rd of December was celebrated as the International Day for People with Disabilities. Now, this is our second roundtable discussion, or should I say, this is our high table discussion, because we have the bosses, and we are going to discuss what happens after decisions and policies are greenlit in boardrooms. What are the roadblocks that may still come in the way of making India Inc. in true spirit an inclusive space for people with disabilities? I would like to introduce my absolutely distinguished and exceptional panel. I'll start with Raghav Behel, who's founder of the Quint. Meera Shenoy, she's founder and CEO of Youth for Jobs. Welcome.
Thanks.
Vineet Saraiwala, he's founder and CEO of Atypical Advantage. Sanjay Davar, Managing Director, Global Strategy and Consulting for Accenture India. He's also the sponsor for disability inclusion at Accenture. Last but not the least, I'm joined by Rekha Taluri. She's India Microsoft CFO, and she's also the sponsor for Disability Employees Resource Group, which is Disability ERG. I extend a very, very warm welcome to all of you. Now, I will go straight to Mr. Davar. Mr. Davar, you talk about inclusion time and again. I just want to know from you, just to open this discussion, what is it that India Inc. can do to make the workforce truly inclusive?
I think starting with the big picture in mind, if you look at the global disability pool, it's about 1 billion people. And as you know, we just crossed the 8 billion mark as the total population. So we are saying about 12.5% of the global population has some disability. And let's recognize that there are more invisible disabilities than there are visible disabilities. So if you take the 70 odd disabilities which are globally talked about, 75% of them are actually below the surface. So I'd say the first thing that corporations need to do is recognize the fact that they have to set a goal, that they need to be representative of the world when it comes to disabilities. So anywhere between 10 and 15% needs to be the target for every corporation on this planet.
Right. Now, I want to ask Rekha, when you talk about health benefits, is there anything that, and these are just, your opening comments that I'm seeking so that we can set the ball rolling for the discussion. When the corporates realize that this is what it is, that we have people with disabilities who may be already employed, or we may be getting them as potential employees. So do you kind of keep a tab on what are the health benefits, and what is it that is going to come up in the discussions?
So I think it's a fantastic question. Before I get to the health benefits, number one thing I think is all corporations, they need to have commitment, right? Just to give an example of our own journey. We had this as a commitment to make the workforce a lot more inclusive, and we had established, back in the 90s, our first ERG for people with disabilities in the company. But what made us make a huge shift is how do we embed that into the culture of DNA of our company, right? It's a cultural shift that we had to go through. And when we say cultural shift, what does it mean? Across various spectrums, all the way from having that, that target in terms of, hey, we need to make this workforce very inclusive, means, we need to have people representing, the world that we are living in, so that, we are also able to make products which are more accessible, more inclusive of the population that we are serving. Right. Second thing, do we have the systems and processes that can help support them? So it could be anything between, for example, at Microsoft, we have something called accommodation. When an employee, they are facing, certain disabilities, are we able to accommodate them? It could be physical accommodations in workplace, or it could be technological, like, they may need assistance, in terms of getting certain tools to make them more productive, or sometimes, it could be accommodation related to they have to travel to your customer place or to a company event. They cannot potentially, some of them may not be able to travel by themselves. Are we able to provide an accommodation to have somebody accompany them? And the other one could also be then it comes to the conversation, right, that you brought up in terms of health benefits, right? Could be we have for mental wellness and all, there's something called employee assistance program. For insurance, for people who are who have kids with certain set of disabilities, are we providing assistance for them? Right. So there is a spectrum of benefits that we provide to our employees, so that it's we are able to support them through this end-to-end journey.
Right. Thank you so much. Raghav, now I want to ask you something that I should have asked you long before, and not just on this panel. You rarely talk about your own disability, but you have seen it all and done it all. Now is the time to maybe speak a little about it.
Well, I don't know. My experience, and I've had my problem way back. It's now been 40 years. So in 40 years, you get used to a lot of things. You've lived more with this than you've lived without it. So, it clearly becomes a part of life. But I just want to make a couple of first generic observations, because I think that's very important to put the debate and the discussion in a framework. My experience of people with disabilities, I want to say two key things. One is that more often than not, there will be exceptions, but more often than not, people with disability become much more calm, much more patient, much more optimistic, frankly, because they know that to achieve anything, they have to work that much harder. So that's something they internalize. And they also know that, they have to be just better than the other guy for them to be even treated equally. So there is a patience and a calmness which descends on you, and evenness of temperament which descends on you. To me, that's a very productive resource in the corporate world. It's an extremely productive resource. I believe that disabled people are more productive than able people because of the sheer focus they are able to bring onto the task at hand. That's point one. Point two, and here I think the world needs to be a little bit more discerning. We put as the number that Mr. Davar said was, there are about 1 billion disabled people. That's 12.5% virtually of the world's population. I think we use disability as a very monolith phrase. Frankly, there are disabilities like mine. I mean, I'm an above the knee amputee, and I don't want to sound facetious, but on a relative scale, it's an inconvenience. I wouldn't really call it a disability. It's an inconvenience. You walk slower than the others, you climb steps a bit slower, but there's no other bodily function that is impaired. There's no mental function that is impaired. And therefore, except for the fact that you are a bit slow relative to the rest of the world, except for the fact that you can't now go to the squash courts and play squash, which you used to before you got that disability. Other than that, you are pretty much equal to anyone else. So I would put some disabilities more in the nature of really slow inconveniences. But I think what gets lumped in the debate are disabilities which are much more severe, disabilities which actually impair bodily functions, disabilities which impair mental functioning, economic disabilities which come along with physical disabilities, which compound the problem of physical disabilities. I mean, I think, it's important to look upon that category with a little bigger lens than what I call the inconvenience category. And I think that your discussion will get much more refined when you look at that. People who are actually grappling with severe immobility, people who are wheelchair bound, people who are sight impaired to a large extent. I mean, I always, whenever you get lumped in this category of disabled, I always have such great admiration for people who are grappling much worse disadvantages in life than the one that I've had to face. So I think any debate that happens should really look upon the degree of disability with a lot more empathy and a lot more sensitivity than just one large box. I mean, that I think is an important one from my side.
Absolutely. And there has to be a gradient approach to even disability when it comes to inclusion. Now, Raghav, you said that people with disability have to work maybe twice as harder to be taken, to be treated at par. And that happens to women more often than not.
Yes, I mean,
Yes.
That's a social disability, and this is a physical disability.
And when it comes to a woman with disability, I think she is twice disadvantaged. So now I really want Meera to give her comments on that.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, Nishta. Adding to what Raghav said, I always say that if you're a woman from a village, poor, and you have a disability, then you have 4 burdens on your shoulder. You'll find that the education levels are low, so therefore employment levels. In fact, the employment levels of women with disability is 50% less than men with disabilities. So you can imagine what the situation is. In villages, they're kept hidden because they think it's a curse on the family. Sexual exploitation is high. But let me tell you what is the magic when they get a job. 40% spend on their own education or education of the siblings. 58% were the highest earning member of the family. And this naturally meant that suddenly they can participate in financial and non-financial decisions of the family. And people would listen to them, they could mentor others, and 20% reduction in sexual exploitation. During COVID, when we did our grassroots online trainings, the women begged us to run separate batches for them. So we did afternoon batches so that they could finish quickly their homework, housework, and join the batches. And then we realized that because 69% of India is in the villages, there were many young women with disability, with children, and young widows. And everyone wanted to be economically independent. That was the common urge. So we, told ourselves that surely we should do something about it. So what we are putting now on the drawing board is a large project which looks at giving them a wider basket of opportunities, because on one hand, you have aspirational jobs for those who can get into the organized sector. Then you have jobs in the MSME and the micro enterprises. And to do this also, we realize that we need to do a really, what I call a studied approach. Common to all, we believe what is important is digital literacy, apps, life skills, soft skills, and adding customized skills. We hope that we would create some impact together for these women. It's still on the drawing board.
Mr. Dawar, I just wanted to understand from you, when it comes to inclusion in the space of disability, what are the implementation challenges that the bosses, that the policymakers face? Yeah. You have the right intent, but is it translating into action?
No, so, the way we look at persons with disabilities, we've sort of got 3 pillars along which we operate. I think the first one is what we call bold leadership. So I think we already talked about the vision, which is, you need to be 10 to 15%. But any change starts from the top. And therefore, what's very important is that you need to bring the senior leadership of the company on board. And so we've got this mechanism wherein we have allies. And it starts with the senior leaders becoming allies first before you get the rest of the people to self-declare. Then amongst your leadership, if you have people who have disability, you want them to stand up and talk about it. So that's leadership coming to, how do you make it happen? I think Rekha talked a bit about it, which is, you've got to look at the physical aspects for mobility. You have to look at technology. It could be screen readers like we had an observation earlier. It could be text to voice, voice to text. I mean, technology plays a huge role in this entire thing. But the biggest impediment which we find is attitudinal. And you have to do a lot of workshops, sensitivity workshops in order to make sure that leaders first and then the rest of the company really understands what it takes to bring a person with a disability and a severe disability, like Raghav was talking about, into the team. And how do you make it successful? And then after this, the third pillar, you have to think about is really how do you empower the entire ecosystem? So medical policies were talked about earlier, but you also need to tie up with agencies which are like-minded. So NGOs to source PWD talent, for example. Right. Industry bodies like CII who are trying to, get the word out there. Right. One of the things I love to talk about is we've done so much for gender diversity by having independent directors who are women on boards. Why can't we have a person with disability on the board? That's Absolutely. How you create that visibility.
Absolutely.
So it's then creating that empowering environment, which really helps bring the change about. For example, opening up all positions that you're recruiting for people with disabilities. One of the things we do in this space is what we call is a inclusive internship. So what you do is you bring in a group of people with disabilities for 3 to 6 months and you put them on programs where they are strong, going back to the strengths point. And it is also an opportunity then to educate and change the attitude of managers, because you also involve the managers in that particular exercise. And so what that does is, not only are you leveraging the strengths of the person with disability, but you're also sensitizing the manager to come and observe and say, look, this is possible. You need to change your mindset and you need to open your mindset that this is a possibility at all. I think the other things which can become impediments very often are, once you have the people in, one of the biggest challenges also is how do you engage with them? So, for example, having a buddy program so that, for the first year that the person is in the organization, how do you actually provide somebody who becomes a confidant of that individual to make sure that they get around the company? Because, these are large companies and the people are not used to working in that environment, but you need somebody to mentor, coach them along the journey. Right. So bold leadership, comprehensive action, empowering sort of environment. All three are required in order to make the change stick.
Without further ado, I really want to ask a very important question, and I want Vineet to answer it. Now, when it comes to data on people with disabilities, we do not have a very rosy picture there. And when you talk about people with disabilities and employment, it's a very dismal picture. And some countries, it's even as high as 80%. So 80% of the total number of people with disabilities are unemployed. Now, how do you make sure that people have at least a fair shot at competing? Whether they get selected or not, that's all right. Whether they get employed or not, but at least they have a level playing field. How does that happen?
See, first of all, the data collection when census 2011 census was there, the questions related to disability were at the end. So typically when teachers used to go for the census collection, they would never ask this question also. So the disability statistics in India is highly underreported, right? Like if developed economy says that 12% of people population is people with disabilities, India can't be at 2%, which is the official census numbers. And coming to the level playing field, see, the level playing field is not there. I think so many of you have talked about it, but just consider, like, for example, my person with disability is not the same as anybody else. For example, I needed to fight for getting soft copies of books or digitally available material, going to school, going to a college, and again, getting scribes, getting teachers. So the level playing field is not there, and this gap actually increases as and when you move forward. And I have seen a lot of recruiters, lot of companies just have this blanket question saying that, hey, I want to hire people with disabilities, but probably why is the condition like this? We need to actually go back to our education system, which is broken for people with disabilities, and that compounds the problem further and further as such. Instead of that, probably, let's say if recruiters go with this lens saying that, let's say everyone is good at something, or probably I'll figure out strengths of people with disabilities. As Raghav was mentioning, like, probably if he would do a marathon, I think he'll do bad at that because he'll be slow. But instead of asking that question, if I ask a person with disability that, hey, what's your strength and how can I leverage that, right? Like whenever we do these interviews, we are primarily from an exclusion mindset, right? That, okay, it's about elimination. We never ask a candidate with disability, or even in general, anybody, that what are your strengths and how can I leverage that strength? And since people with disabilities have their own uniques, right? Like, for example, everything is about probably a lot of unknown things figuring out in the workforces, and people with disabilities are good at it. Like, for example, I figured out my way of living life independently, right? Without tech, without the life or government support, technology, society being inaccessible, apps being inaccessible. So we have navigated all the difficult criteria and circumstances in life, and that gives us a very unique perspective. And if we can probably deal with such factors in life, like for example, my condition is retinitis pigmentosa, and it keeps on going down as age progresses. And right now I have only 10% vision remaining, and I use screen reader for everything as such. And I don't know what will happen 10 years down in life for me. So again, it's an unknown, but I know how to navigate that unknown. And probably that value which I would bring to the table would be very different because of my unique life experiences. Absolutely. And yeah, so we should probably focus on inclusion, ask simple questions saying that, hey, what's your strength? How can I leverage that? So probably that lens would give wider employment numbers, and the employment numbers are definitely dismal in our country. But having said it, we need to look at positive aspects, figure out things from a strength-based approach. So, sure. Yeah.
Is this the strength-based approach, Rekha, that was, at the heart of your campaign, the Microsoft campaign to create 1 lakh opportunities to close the disability divide, and you partnered with Enable India?
I think little bit background on that, right? The number one thing, to Vinit's point, the reason why we are doing this is first, how do we ensure, we are true to our mission? When we say, at Microsoft, we want to empower every person and every organization on the planet to do more. It's every person, everyone, each one of the 8 billion people that we're talking about, right? That's number one thing. And for us, like, disability is a strength in order to create a more inclusive workforce. And, technology can be an enabler. We heard Vinit talk about it. It can be a huge enabler in terms of, making people with disability a lot more productive, equipping them with to do things a lot more efficiently also, right? So, and when you look at the unemployment rate today out there, it's almost double in many countries, and in India, it's a lot higher. And if we have to bridge that unemployment, and we want to make sure like we are imparting that technological skills to the audience, so that they are, and it's and there are several things that we're doing with Enable India on that, right? It's not just providing skilling to the to people with disability, it's also working with the organizations.
Right.
As part of this MOU that we signed with Enable India, a partnership with Enable India is to onboard 100+ organizations onto that platform that Enable India is creating, to bring in 100,000 people with disability into workforce. It will be to providing mentorships, internships, projects, and bringing in more and more people into the workforce.
Right.
And while this is one program, there are certain other things that we have been doing. We had entered into a partnership with SBI Foundation through American Indian collaboration, American Indian Foundation, that we have been doing for quite a few years now. And we have onboarded several other corporates as well to partner with us in that journey. We created almost like 650+ jobs for people with disabilities in the banking sector. Something that we have been on a journey to employing them with to train them on technical skills and bring them into the employment. There's one other program that we have been doing with other corporates like Dell, SAP, and all together we can program. It's also about sharing best practices with other corporates, and together we are also creating, accelerating the journey that we have been on.
Fabulous. I think that's a very comprehensive sort of primer that we have got on various schemes and various hand-holding initiatives that are underway in India Inc. So maybe, slowly and steadily, we are going to be there. The very inclusive, very welcoming space for people with disabilities. Raghav, I want to ask you, when it comes to making offices, making workplaces disability friendly, when did this idea strike you as that this has to be done, this has to be there? And when were these initiatives taken by you?
I think these are, these physical sort of things that you have to create to make life easier. I think these are the simpler ones. I think there's also a lot of mandate around it now that you must have this, you must have a toilet which has handrails and all of that. I think that's the easier bit to do. I think a couple of points that have emerged in these discussions. I think the point that Vineet made, that really, Nishtha, goes to the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
Ask the person his or her strength, rather than asking him or her to measure up and see whether he or she is able to measure up. Because I come back to the core point. I am absolutely convinced, having seen both sides and having had colleagues from both sides, the productivity level of a quote unquote disabled person, when slotted in the right place. I mean, if you ask them to run a marathon, as Vineet said, that's not good enough. He or she will not be able to run a marathon. But when you ask them to deploy their skills in something that they are innately good at, believe me, your productivity levels will be much higher, because they are much more focused. They are much more, they want to excel much more than the normal person. So I think it's affirmative action in that sense. All other affirmative actions are welcome. What NGOs do is welcome. What universities, if they have quotas, are welcome. Corporations which have quotas are welcome. Affirmative action in terms of having alleys to get wheelchairs up and having toilets which have got handrails, those are all welcome. But I think the biggest thing, and that goes back to the point that Sanjay also made, about the attitudinal change, about the fact that he talked about, and I love that point, that some of the leadership has to stand up and become role models for the rest of the organization. I think it's much more in that ecosystem that you have to bring the bigger changes, the more visible changes. As far as physical attributes are concerned, I mean, that's easy. That's easy. And it's easy and also easily ignored. I mean, we've all gone through Indian airports, and we all realize how unnecessarily difficult they make your job. Unnecessarily. I've never had a problem traveling through an American airport, but you go through an Indian airport, and the person who frisks you touches your prosthesis and says, "Isme metal hai kya?" So I said, "भाई metal नहीं होगा तो body का weight कहाँ से लेगा? भाई metal ही तो है, उसके बिना कहाँ से होगा?" So I think it's much more about sensitizing and getting people to understand this. Otherwise, the physical bits are fine. I mean, those are really not the problem.
Right. Mr. Davar, I want to understand a little more about your accessibility center in Bangalore. So I had the chance to speak to somebody from the accessibility center. So just tell us a little more about
Sure. So see, this is something that emanated because one of our employees in Philippines, not even in India, had to go through the process of trying on 32 headsets before he could really determine which is the best headset for him. And so what that did is it created a wave within our organization to open multiple accessibility centers. And we've got about 35 odd now around the globe, including India. Essentially, what you have in this center is 4 or 5 sections in the center, obviously for mobility, speech and hearing, vision, prevention, and also well-being. I mean, these are the 5 broad categories that we have. And it becomes a place where somebody with a disability can come and try out already available technologies and also access. In the case of many individuals, you also need well-being advice, right? So there's a dedicated section just about well-being as far as the center is concerned. So it's a way of making it easy for the individual to come try out things, ask questions, and then choose. So simply put, it's that. Now it's evolved into what we call activation centers, because we are now inviting clients to it, because even our clients want to come and see how they can leverage this. And then it becomes our way of also making sure we can handhold them through their journey on this particular agenda. So in a nutshell, that's what the activation centers are all about.
So, Meera, my question to you is, how is Accenture working with Youth for Jobs to make persons with disabilities more employable?
Yeah, we've been working with Accenture for the last 3 years when we started our college program for the educated youth with disabilities. There we have a IT Academy, the Banking and Financial Academy, and we have a finishing school. I think some of the best practices of Accenture, which we find when we work with companies with the educated persons with disabilities, is that unlike most companies which hire a few, my team calls Accenture a bulk placement organization, because they say that they take, larger numbers of them. Not just that, what is progressive is the fact that when we have a large number of trained persons with disabilities, we actually call up the HR and say, listen, we have these. And then with their support, we fit them into various kinds of positions which are suitable for them, as the discussion went. The second is that to get jobs for speech and hearing impaired, educated youth with disabilities is really not easy. We find again that Accenture is willing to hire speech and hearing impaired. For example, recently, I think we did a drive where out of the 63 who got jobs, 40 of them were speech and hearing impaired. Mm-hmm. The other positive thing, which I think is a best practice, is the way they prep the candidates. They give us the sample questions. They do mock interviews for individuals before the final interviews are taken. And that, I think, prepares the candidate and gives them a better chance of actually making it, because sometimes their self-confidence are low. If you look at all this, I think what is running through all this is the I can attitude, which everyone in this panel spoke about. And I was just thinking to myself that if even 1,000 companies could actually have this I can attitude, it could actually be a game changer for this
absolutely
work.
So my question again is to Mr. Dawar here. The conscious employer, we are very much fond of these very fancy terms and epithets. What does it mean to have a kind of, because coming from Meera, who has closely worked with your organization, I think I need a little more of your perspective. She has said good things about you. I need to learn a little more about this consciousness that prevails.
Yeah. So see, I mean, we've been on this journey now for a very long time. I mean, I look at inclusion and diversity as something which is imperative for every organization. In my specific role as the PWD sponsor, it's my job to think about, how do we get our population to that 10 to 15% range. There's a lot that needs to be done here. But more broadly, conscious organization, it's about predominantly three things for us. One is skills to succeed. So what we do is we do a lot of training of largely women in the technology space from underprivileged sections of society in order to make sure that we can make them job ready. So it's like deep training in some technology or something which will give them an edge in terms of getting a job. That's one. And we've done over 500,000 such trainings as far as the India geography is concerned.
Right.
The second is around technology for good. I think, everyone's talking about technology. So how do you use technology for good? So we've got various apps which we've developed with the multiple agencies. Dhwani, for example, is one, which is a voice to text and text to voice for hearing impaired and for that particular population. And then ultimately, it's you just keep thinking about this and make sure that you keep improving on your agenda over a period of time in order to make sure that you're making an impact. And these pillars all apply to PWD too. So our inclusive internship is actually a way of ensuring we're doing training so that the person is competent to join us.
Right.
But it is a small group as against a large group training which is being conducted. So it's aspects of that nature, honestly.
Right. Now, I have to ask everyone for their final comments because unfortunately we have run out of time. And this has been a very informative discussion. And I've learned, personally, I've learned quite a lot about what has been going on in India Inc.
It's for us, it has been a journey. And I think, we all have a long way to go, as we heard from the comments this morning, earlier today, right? And I together we can each accelerate this journey by sharing. Today for me, I picked up a lot of best practices from Mr. Dawar. So together we can accelerate the journey by sharing some of the best practices, and India Inc. has a long way to go on this.
Right. Thank you. Vineet Saraiwala.
I think first, for me, I think just believe that everyone is good at something. That's key. Number two, and when we think of employment, it's not only full-time employment. There are so many people with disabilities who can do freelancers. There's amazing performing artists, visual artists, entrepreneurs with disability. So if we collectively as persons with disability want to generate more livelihood, it can't happen only with full-time job opportunities, because there are certain disabilities and certain people who are more comfortable with, let's say, work from home opportunities. Like, for example, there was this artist who was non-verbal and he is doing caricature workshop for corporates, like almost 10 workshops. In fact, Accenture did their first one with that. So we need to look at all of these options also, and not only full-time. So yeah, that's a message.
Recently, we launched Swarajability. Swaraj, because it's a Gandhian word for independence, ability, because it leverages the abilities of youth with disabilities through tech trainings and jobs. I think what is important is that in this space, we all cannot work in silos. We all have to come together. So when we created this platform itself, which was we launched it 3 months back, we brought the government office of the PSA's Government of India. We brought the IIT Hyderabad, which is supposed to be the leader in computer sciences. We had NIMHANS for all the disabilities, which Raghav, I think, spoke about. We had CII, which is the industry body. So we brought all of them right in the conception. And we really hope that this, though we've made the investment and spent a lot of hours poring over it, we really hope that this will be a game changer by bringing all people onto board for this. So I think the answer is together we can.
Certainly, and wish you all the best for this initiative. Sanjay Davar.
There are two things I would say. One is we need to, as a nation, figure out, and especially as a corporate sector, figure out how do we get more people with disabilities into organizations. And so, we've got one mantra, for example, which is each one get one. Now, if you take the 70 disabilities into account, everybody has knowledge of somebody in their extended family friend circle who has some form of disability. And therefore, I believe that this referral piece is something that really needs to catch on as far as corporate India and India more largely is concerned. And the second thing, which I do believe, is we need to engage with the families of the people with disabilities a lot more closely. Knowing people in my extended family who have some disabilities, it's rarely are decisions taken by the individual who's affected. It's always a collective decision. And therefore, there's got to be a much, much better way of corporates engaging not just with the individual, but also with the families of that individual. And that's when you really will create a lot more traction around this initiative as far as India is concerned. So those are 2 points I would just say.
Right. Raghav.
In this discussion that you've had, lots of issues have gotten discussed. One issue, which again, I can speak with my experience of having engaged with a lot of people who work with disabilities. It was only touched tangentially, but it's very important. I think Sanjay spoke about it. He talked about a sort of a buddy system where when they are in, so you've got them in, so they are good guys. You figured out that they know their job, they got skill sets, you like them, you've got them in. But there's an attribute of a disabled person, which again is shared by almost every disabled person. They are used to loneliness. Loneliness becomes a part of them, and they don't react to it as something which is toxic. They accept it, and they are loners by the very circumstance of their life. But so if they come to work, they do their job, and they go back, they're not going to be unhappy because they've accepted it. They've accepted the loneliness. But the point that Sanjay made about engaging them, having a sort of buddy system, having the software of the organization is such that they slowly shed their loneliness and become as much of a part of the mainstream of the organization, whether it's offsites. I think Rekha made that wonderful point that if they have a little problem in traveling, and believe me, a lot of them do. Travel is one of the big challenges of a disabled person. How do you move from one place to another, then check into a hotel, and then look after yourself when there's no one around you. The fact that if they need attendance, then a family attendant can go with them and the organization supports it. These small little things, but they will take the person out of his or her loneliness and engage much more with the mainstream of the organization. I think that point, again, to me is an attitudinal point. It's a software point of the organization, but extremely important. Otherwise, if you let them be, I'm telling you, they're fine with their loneliness. They have no problem. No bitterness, no toxicity. They'll come, do their job, and go back. But that you'll only be using them half their potential.
Right. It's about leveraging. It benefits everybody if the person is elevated to a certain level, which they are capable of, but maybe do not realize it themselves. So I'm quite overwhelmed at the moment, and this discussion has been a real eye-opener, not in only in terms of content, but the kind of empathy that has come across from everybody. And the panel, as I said while opening this discussion, is actually a heavyweight panel, and people who are making policies, who are actually signing off on things that actually matter, that will make a change down the line. Now, when that holistic and like really radical transformative change would occur, we have to wait and watch, but it is a beginning, and not an insignificant beginning, I have to say. And my congratulations to everybody who is a stakeholder in this process. Thank you so much for being a part of this really interesting, informative, and a look ahead sort of a discussion when it comes to inclusivity in India Inc. Thank you very much.